Yeah. Oh, it's been amazing since I discovered this. My brain is just going back to all these different things, these different relationships and situations and scenarios and things that I did that were just amazing, and how I did them. And I just my head is full as I kind of go through this process of kind of unloading since I've discovered the ASD.
4 points from today were that autism and ADHD often look very similar on the outside, but that the same behaviour may have a different underlying cause. ADHD is a difference in one area, attention, whereas autism is a suite of differences over many areas that may or may not include attention. So attention can also be underregulated or overregulated, and too much or too little are both signs of a neurological difference. Finally, autism has an uneven profile of abilities or gaps in my skill set, which is not necessarily found in ADHD.
So, I had a very busy life, and it started out, I had a big household.
4 key concepts that highlight the difference between autism and ADHD and explain why they often look the same on the outside while comparing that to what's actually happening on the inside.
My mom had 2 children from a previous marriage. When she married my dad, and of course this is long before I was born, when she married my dad, they had 6 children. I was the third, so I've got the middle child kind of syndrome thing going too, whatever that is. Drop a comment, let me know what that is. I don't know what the middle child syndrome is.
With ADHD and autism look very similar on the outside.
So I had a busy, and then once I hit, I had a terrible time in school. School was absolute hell for me. I went to a private Catholic school where I have more marks and scars in my neck from nuns' fingernails than you could ever approve of.
The differences come because even though there are overlapping symptoms, those symptoms have different causes.
And got kicked out of there in the 4th grade because I finally just imploded, whatever you want to call it. Was a big behavioral problem. And then I went to, my sister married a guy outside of town with a great big farm. And starting in the 7th grade, I started going out on weekends and holidays, summers. I was at the farm all the time, from my 7th grade through, actually, to be honest with you, even including through college.
ADHD is a neurological difference in predominantly one area, namely attention regulation. Autism, on the other hand, is a suite of neurological differences across many areas.
Come back there and spend time. And I just had when I go back and look at my farm life, and I look at the things that I did really well and the things that I enjoyed doing, they were all very large projects that required a tremendous amount of focus to complete, and they were completed masterfully.
Let me give you 2 quick examples. When I was little, I designed a large maze with a computer program, and it required me to manually calculate and enter a number code into each of several thousand cells, right? Each cell was one little room in this maze, right? It was a huge amount of work. I knew it would take hours, days, maybe even weeks of my time, right? Depending on how far.
And that's kind of, that's just the way it went for me. Now, is anyone gonna say, was anyone going to stand up above me and say, that young man just completed that job masterfully? No, they're not going to say that. I know it was masterfully. As an example, we had a full section of land, which is a mile by a mile by a mile by a mile. And that was all crops, except for where the actual farmstead was in one of the corners.
Blue is not a rainbow, red is not a rainbow, even blue and red together are not a rainbow. But once you've got enough colours, And it doesn't really matter which colours you have, but once you've got enough of them, the word rainbow starts to make sense. ADHD is part of the neurodiversity rainbow. It's not just about being easily distracted, and in real life it comes with additional challenges in several areas such as emotional regulation and working memory, just to name a few.
And during the summer, when we would grow soybeans on that field, which get to be about 4 feet high, somewhere in there, the grass would grow up taller than the beans around the beans near the fence line. And so my job was to take this gigantic mower that you pushed and walked behind and, had belts on it and everything, self-propelled. And it was a weed eater, and it was gigantic, and it was heavy, and it was hot. And my job was to go around that entire section of land and clean all that up, mow that all down. It took about 3 or 4 passes on each fence line. And then each fence line, of course, is a mile long. So
autism is often characterized by overregulation, fixating, or getting stuck.
I could focus on that job, and I could get that job done like nobody's business. And you want to talk about hot?
But as we mentioned earlier, autism can actually be either.
You want to talk about seeing snakes? You want to talk about bugs you've never seen before? Being thirsty, and being miles away from home in the middle of a field. Don't understand this, but in a farm that does farrow to finish, and that means you have baby pigs with sows that have baby pigs, and then you raise those baby pigs to go to market. So you basically supply yourself with your inventory. It's the cheapest way to do it if you do it well, but you have to be all in or all out. We were all in. And that required clean floors. So when you had the barn full of crates where sows are crated up, happily so, because they're about to give birth, and then they give birth, and it's a safe, clean environment, clean as far as an animal goes, and they give birth and they raise their pigs to a certain size until they're ready to be weaned, and then we take them out of the barn. We take the sows out of the barn and recycle them back again, and the pigs go on their way. Well, that floor needed to be cleaned on a regular basis, and this was back in the old days. It was a pitchfork, people. It was a pitchfork. I could stand at the edge of that barn when I was assigned to clean that barn, which was huge for a young kid, and I could literally put it in my mind that I was going to do that, what it was going to look like, how it was going to be received, everything about how that was going to be done. I could lock and load. Nothing could interrupt me. Nothing would stop me from completing that. It was almost like I could go away in my head while I was doing the work. And there was absolutely, as hard as it was, as many flies as there were, in the walking and picking up manure with maggots in it and everything else. And I could put that all out of my head, and I could do that job, which sometimes would take a full day to do. And when that was done, I was the proudest person in the world of that barn, how clean that floor was. And I used to keep it clean. So the unfortunate thing is you don't always have time to do those things when you have crops, because you're out in the field spraying, or you're cultivating, or you're picking, or you're planting. And those things take all the sunlight parts of the day. As long as there's sunlight, you're out in your fields. And then once the sun goes down, you come home and you start doing chores, which is where the animals are. And so after a very long day of baling hay, or whatever the case may be, it was time to clean that barn. Oh boy, I could do it. I could lock and load. And there's one other thing about locking and loading that I want to tell you about. My life went on after the farm to college, which was a disaster, and I would never have graduated with 2 degrees if it wouldn't have been for the woman that I married, Bridget. She was She was my my guardian angel, and she had a way of communicating with me, and she had a way of helping me that no one else had, and I made it through. And I'm not going to say I was an all-star on the GPA scale, but for me, I did really well, and I made it. And that's something that didn't happen in school, in the grade school or high school. I was behind or failing in everything, definitely a C student or below. So when I met Bridget, was in college, and then we moved in together and got married. We were married for 17 years, but Bridget had a brain tumor. And all Bridget wanted to do was get married, have kids, and travel and do things. Typically, you plan your life where you do your working years, where you save money, and then you use your retirement years to go and do the traveling and those kinds of things. Well, in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that brain tumor might not be a good thing for her in the long run. And so subconsciously, unconsciously, I made the decision to do all that stuff in the beginning, which was financially irresponsible, but was emotionally intelligent. And we traveled. We had 3 children. We traveled, we did things, and we were constantly busy. We traveled abroad, we traveled all over the United States. We did all kinds of things, cruises, you name it, we did it. Bridget got really sick, and it turned out that I had to take the kids and raise the kids. Now, my youngest one at this time had not yet turned a year old. And it was time for me to go raise the kids, and it was time for Bridget to be able to focus on what she needed to focus on, which by this time she lost the use of her right side. She lost the use of her language, and she had been suffering for years. We made the decision. It wasn't fun. There wasn't anything pretty about it. But I had to go and I had to raise the kids, because I couldn't raise the kids, come home for lunch every day like I had been for my whole kids' lives, take care of things and then go back to work and then come home and take care of things again. There were things Bridget couldn't do. She just couldn't do them. Flat out. And the other thing about Bridget is she didn't want people to know, so we hid her disability as much as we could. So anyway, that's a long story. That's another one. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when Bridget and I made that decision, that the best thing for our children was to be raised by their father, away from their mother, so their mother could get full treatment, have live-in nurses, go to a home, have the life and the care that she needed to have. I stood in front of that decision, just like I stood in front of that barn. And I knew that Bridget had taught me what she wanted for her children. That's what she had been teaching me all those years. Because at this time I had, my daughter was not yet 1, my middle son was 3, and my oldest son was 11. Bridget, throughout all my oldest son's life and my second son, was teaching me what she wanted for those children. She was teaching me how to raise those children. And I stood in front of that decision with absolutely no confidence, didn't have a clue, even though I had been doing so much to do it all. The emotional part, the part where you get to lay in bed and talk about what your kid did that day, all that, I'm going to do that alone. I stood in front of that decision like I stood in front of the barn. I knew what that needed to look like at the end. And I clamped down. I got rid of all of my friends. I focused 100% on my children. I went to every school conference, every play, every choir recital, every football game, basketball, every sporting event. I coached every sport. I literally focused my life on my children, 100%. And I did that because I have an uncanny ability to be able to hyper focus on something for a very long period of time. And that's what I did. Why is that important? Because just like that barn, it seemed insurmountable. Based on how tired I was at the end of that day or days that I would have to clean that barn, based on how much was in there and how long it had been since it had been cleaned, what time of day it was, based on everything, everything was insurmountable about cleaning that barn. But I couldn't let that occupy my mind. I had to focus. And I have the ability to hyper focus on something for a very long period of time. And I did that with my children, which is a great thing because I have 3 beautiful, wonderful adult children today. And they can tell you it wasn't easy. They're going along this journey of discovery with me. And they can tell you it wasn't easy with me. I'm weird. I do things weird. I could put all that stuff aside. I could focus, and that was done. The other thing I could do is I could clean the barn. A lot of people